Okay. Sweet. Thanks for the follow, Jeff Thomas Black. Appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. My name is Will. You can call me Contraband. And this is the Contraband Wagon where we're changing the conversation on race. Thank you for joining me for a kind of unique event that we're going to have today. We're talking with Echoplex Media's Dave. Really happy to have him here. But before we get into it, just want to remind everyone how you can get involved with the Contraband Wagon if you're interested in what we do here. So what do we do here? Well, basically, I typically have 2-hour live conversations with people about the subject of race and racism. These are people who are strangers, oftentimes with social media. Anyone who's interested in talking about the subject matter and looking for a safe place to discuss it is welcome to come here. Just go to my website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com. Click on the submit application button. I'll get back to you via email where we'll set up a Zoom call and we can, kind of give you a little more background on the show. You can ask questions. We'll develop a list of bullet points you want to hit, and then we'll schedule a date and time for your live appearance. The only requirements are that you come with an open heart and open mind, okay? We also do a book club. We do round robin discussion on race at the end of every month via Zoom. You could be an anonymous guest. So there are very many ways to get involved. Make sure that you do. And as always, thank you to all of my patrons. For all the patrons out there, thank you guys to the Contrabandists for your continued support in creating space for these conversations. That's what we're all about. But today, we're doing something a little bit differently. And of course, we probably will touch on the subject of race somewhat, but I really got interested in this subject matter of cults and kind of cult ideology, how people get sucked into cults, people's experience with cults and whatnot, because I've just studied a little bit of it and kind of have been disturbed with a lot of the things that I've found out about how they work, how people are manipulated into them, and kind of how people's lives are ruined by them oftentimes. And I've even had my own personal story with a friend from undergrad who was sucked into one as well. So I've got some personal experience as well. So I wanted to bring in our resident expert. And here he is on the Contraband Wagon for the first time. We're glad to have him. Welcome to the Contraband Wagon, Dave. How we doing, brother?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for being here. And thank you, Jeff Thomas Black. Appreciate your subscription, brother. Really appreciate that. All right.
Oh yeah, well, I bring the my own cult with me. They will subscribe to your channel.
See, but this is a good thing, right? Because it helped me. So appreciate you letting everyone know about this, and let's just jump right into it, man. Like, how did you first become exposed to cults in general?
Well, I mean, like, I'm old enough to sort of remember the Satanic Panic. But a lot of that was bullshit. There was no satanic cults coming and eating your babies, right? But that was like sort of what I thought a cult was when I was a kid, or maybe even into young adulthood, was that I assumed that they were mostly like satanic cults or like, I guess, anti-Christian religious sects. And that turned out to be grossly incorrect.
And so you probably got that impression from like stuff that you had seen on media, right? I know there was like a huge media push there about devil worship and whatnot.
Oh yeah. I mean, backmasking on records and stuff. And we do a whole show about cults and the Satanic Panic. And I think the reason I put the show together that way is because I still probably associate it in some way in my mind. But what really got me interested into cults, and I like to talk about it a little differently. And I'm going to go ahead and shout out real quick John Atack from the Open Minds Foundation, because a lot of this is borrowed or remixed from some of his work. You can check him out. His JOHNATACK. Anyway, if I spelled it wrong, you can just look up John Atack Open Minds. They have things on there, cute little memes that are like, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to join a cult. But I like to talk about high control and high demand groups, because that's more specific and doesn't carry all of the baggage of the Satanic Panic with it.
All right, go for it.
So, and I mean, it's just what it says. It's a high control and high demand group where they're all up in your business and trying to make sure that you do what they say. It could be and it also allows us to talk about these things outside of like top down cults. Like we're going to talk a lot about Scientology today, but a high demand, high control group could be an abusive relationship. And a lot of the same dynamics are at play there. And so it's just when someone or someones have undue influence over someone or someone's. And that's like what I'm interested in. And when we do our show about, cults and the satanic panic, we do try to keep it kind of light and funny because stuff's kind of grim, and who's going to want to watch doom and gloom about, sad story after sad story after sad story of people who got involved in a cult. And I think that's why Scientology sort of makes it easy in ways to talk about cults and high control, high demand groups, because some of it's really silly. Like the story about Xenu with the H bombs and it being, however many million years ago, a time that, we don't really know. We have no idea what happened 500 years ago. Really. How do we even know the dude's name from, what was it, 13 trillion years ago or whatever it was supposed to be? But the way I got involved, it's a lot of times it's a sad story with this stuff. And it's a long time ago, and I'm not too super broken up about it now. But in around 2004, a friend of mine had lost her mother. Her mother was a Scientologist, and she ended up, through a series of events that I understand some of and don't understand some other parts, she ended up running off to Clearwater and joining the Scientology Sea Org, and pretty much hasn't been heard from since. And I needed to know everything about what stole my friend. I just had to know everything about it because it's just my way, right? Otherwise I was just going to wallow or whatever. So me and a couple friends actually got kind of involved in looking into what's going on with Scientology. Like what are they talking about? What are they doing? What might be going on in Clearwater? And we learned a little bit. It took till about 2007 or 2008 till everything got dumped on the internet. If everybody remembers that Tom Cruise video, they kept getting pulled down. Yeah, where there's one with him on Oprah and the couch, and then there's that other one with the Mission Impossible music playing that he keeps talking about. Like, do you know a suppressive person?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And so that sort of kicked a lot of people in the pants to take a look into it, not just regular people, but journalistic outlets. People say what they want about Gawker, but Gawker did good work on Scientology when they first started, and they went up against them and refused to take down that video. So, and that's when I started to kind of organize with other people, both locally and on the internet. I was at some of the protests, where a lot of people were showing up in that Guy Fawkes mask when, this was the kind of the beginning of the internet group loosely known as Anonymous. And, I guess that's sort of the short version of the story. And I guess ever since then, I've been learning more about it. And I think maybe when I started podcasting, I wanted to learn more about the cult dynamics and not just learn about Scientology specifically. And that's when I started learning more about like demand and control and how these play like an important part in cults. And it became interesting to me too, because we do conspiracy theory content, and not every conspiracy theory community is going to have all the aspects of these high control, high demand groups, but it ain't not in the recipe.
Yeah, and many of them do, right? Like, I mean,
right.
So I think a good place to start is, first of all, maybe just for the audience, you can explain to them what a suppressive person actually means, because I think that's a good segue into, how these methods of control are developed and utilized.
Yeah, suppressive person, according to Scientology, would be someone like me, someone who is actively critical because we're trying to suppress their greater truth. They're trying to clear the planet and save the world, and I'm trying to suppress them. And that's what a suppressive person is. And you're right. This is a good starting point because the clear as day in group, out group mechanics going on here. It was an excellent place to start.
Yeah. And yeah, it couldn't be more clear, right? Because and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this information, but from what I've learned about it is like, if you are designated a suppressive person, it doesn't matter whether the person who's designated that is part of your family. It doesn't matter how long you've known them, if you're friends or whatever. You are to have no contact with that person. And in fact, I believe there's an entire rule book outlining how you should treat someone who is labeled as a suppressive person. And there are some ugly things in that rule book, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the first thing you touched on was disconnection. They just have a policy of disconnection. And when they've been asked about it by the media, they just go, well, this is the individual's choice and it's your human right to disconnect from someone. And sure, I don't disagree with that. If I'm like, hey, Contra, I don't ever want to talk to you again. Like, I have that right. That would be dumb. You're a cool guy. We've had some fun on the internet, but it would be my right. And I would hope that you would leave me alone, because otherwise there's rules about that called stalking. Um, but um, when we talk about the suppressive people, what they if they think you're bad enough or that you're doing enough, they have a policy called fair game. And that means you're fair game. It's like maybe the mob would greenlight you, right? Or a gang would greenlight you. It's similar, except they're probably not going to shoot you. But anything short of that, they'll send private investigators after you. They'll try to take legal action. They'll SWAT you. If people don't know what swatting is, it's falsely calling the police on you, and even to harass you, or sometimes the cops kill you if you get swatted. They've done that to people I've interviewed. They'll go to your neighbor's house and tell your neighbors that you're a felon when you're not. They'll tell your neighbors you're a sex offender if you're not. And these are all like examples of what's happening. But the verbiage, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me, is something like you can utterly destroy this person if if you were engaged in fair game against them. And it's luckily enough, the cult seems to not have the resources, at least the manpower that they once did, or the people power that they once did, to do this. And a lot of PIs won't work with them anymore.
That's great to hear. Wow, I hadn't heard that. That's really good to hear.
But some still will, and if you could get on their radar, and the people higher up in the organization get extra mad at you, they'll find a way to fuck with you. But it's not as bad as it once was. And I think it's just that they can't recruit anymore. So everybody's getting older. And so you're not going to send, an old person after me, not because like an old person can't harass you. It's just not very intimidating if Mrs. Pennington comes and is like, oh, you should stop it. So but it doesn't mean they won't do it and they have no interest in doing it. It's just that they don't have the resources to do it to as many people as often anymore. But yeah, it's pretty bad. Doxing. They probably invented doxing, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, they're going to go to any lengths. Some of the lengths that I've discovered that they go to is they make their parishioners sign a contract giving away their parental rights oftentimes to their own children. And, this allows the organization to then control, the mind and body and freedom of movement of these children.
Right. And if you're involved in the cult, you have no idea that this contract is. You can't make a contract for somebody when they join your cult. A court would look at that contract and be like, we're done here. You can't sign away your kids to Scientology.
Yeah,
but people don't know that. They don't know their rights. Once they get in there, they're not being told their rights when they're being in there. They're being told that their only rights are to do what Scientology says.
And by then, by the time they're putting that pen to paper, oftentimes a lot of people are willing to do it, right? Like they're willing and ready to do it because they've been brainwashed into believing that that is something that they should do for the benefit of Scientology and for the benefit of the world.
And you mentioned kids too. One of the interesting things is they think of kids as tiny adults, not as children who have special requirements, special needs for attention, special needs for love. Because kids need more affection and love than adults do, like especially from their parents, right? So that's one of the things they basically take away people's childhoods in that organization. People will call a little boy sir. You don't call a little boy sir.
That's horrible. Yeah,
you're like, hey, little man.
That's rough, man. And that was one of the things that struck me when I was learning about Scientology is how there's no distinction between child and adult for them. And they do rob kids of their childhood. And like a lot of these people who end up escaping, and start reflecting on what they lost, start meeting people outside the cult, start realizing what they lost. I just can't imagine the devastation that brings mentally for these people who are able to escape, not to mention what they go through while they're in that environment.
And for a little while after they leave, if they were higher up in the organization, or if they have the temerity to maybe speak to someone like me, or even someone like you who just wants to hear their story, you better bet Scientology is going to come a knocking, or at least send in some emails or whatever. Oh, you signed confidentiality agreements with us and all this. And so, on top of that, they're trying to process their own trauma while oftentimes being subject to like horrible harassment. And processing trauma is tough enough. I mean, we've all had to do it in our lives when we had support networks around us. But when you get out of Scientology, a lot of times your family and your friends are Scientology. A lot of times you lose your job when you leave because your boss is is a Scientologist. You got your job through the cult. In fact, if you get, past a little ways through, they discourage you from working for anyone else unless, cha-ching. If you're working for if you're working for like a Hollywood movie studio, they ain't asking you to quit. They're asking you to sign on the dotted line.
That's
They'll
right.
be like, oh, you should take out like 6 more credit cards. Actually, you got a good income here. But if you're like a regular, even like an upper middle class person, they're going to encourage you to work for, in your professional capacity for a Scientologist, because it's another way they can control you. The only way to escape that is to be rich, because there aren't enough hyper rich people in there maybe to, like, they can't hire Tom Cruise for the amount of money he charges for a movie. So for them to get that money from Tom Cruise, they got to go let him work for, I mean, the word normal might be the wrong word here. Maybe to work for a non-Scientologist.
Got it.
They call us WOGs, by the way. If we're just not Scientologists, but we're not yet suppressive people, we're WOGs. And I have no idea what it stands for. I forget.
I don't know, sounds like Muggles or something from Harry
Sounds
Potter.
like some kind of slur. Maybe I shouldn't even be saying.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely sounds like a derogatory word. Yeah. So I mean, it makes sense, right? Like in America in general, but also in organizations that are taking advantage of people. Of course, the dollar is going to change all of their entire philosophy, right? They're going to go where the money is. They're going to extract as much wealth as they can. And am I correct in thinking that Scientology has extracted literally billions from people this way?
Not billions from any given individual, although it might be getting kind of close there on Tom Cruise's side, because he's made some money. And you don't ever hear of him living a super lavish life. The only thing you ever really hear about him is who's he dating and what's going on with him in the cult. So, I mean, I'm sure he's got a nice house and stuff, but they might have extracted 500, 600 million from him alone. And yeah, their real estate holdings are estimated to be in the billions.
Yeah. I mean, with that kind of power, I guess one thing that always comes up when I'm thinking about this stuff, there's cults of different sizes, cults of different power, right? And financial means. So there's different levels of control that they can have, even though they all use similar mechanisms of control. So I guess like when it comes to something as massive as Scientology, which has been given the designation as a religion, right? So why do you think something that's so transparently and blatantly immoral and just criminal in a lot of instances, or on the border of that, why is it being allowed to flourish? Why is it being allowed to I mean, these people seem to be able to do whatever they want, including in general, before, a coalition kind of tried to hold some people accountable. Like, how is this allowed? Why is this okay? What makes it happen?
So they weren't designated a religion until after L. Ron Hubbard had died, actually. It was during the reign of David Miscavige. And there's like a whole story behind it, and I wouldn't be able to tell it like succinctly right now. But there were individual Scientologists were, for example, suing individual IRS agents. And so they just like did a massive like lawsuit campaign against the IRS, and the IRS folded on
what?
Their
Wait,
status.
the IRS folded?
Yes.
It kills me to hear all these stories. Every time I hear one of these stories about a government agency folding to a group of individuals, I'm always just like, or any institution at all, like I'm just like floored with that. Man, I feel like if a group of black people got together, the government would never fold, no matter what we
Well,
wanted.
that's the other thing about Scientology that we're probably going to get into in a little bit. That Scientology wasn't no group of black people, my friend.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm sure it has
That
something to
shit's
do
as
with
white as Andrew Yang's Forward Party, man.
it. Oh my
But
gosh.
but I mean, it wasn't like dozens of lawsuits. It was hundreds or possibly thousands. And there were individual IRS agents who were being sued by 10, 20, 30 individual Scientologists. And, the lawsuits would have all been thrown out, but the IRS would have still had to go defend those lawsuits until they got thrown out, right? It would have wasted time and money that they could have used to like audit some food server who might not have claimed their tips. And I mean, we can't have that now, can we, friendo?
Wow. It's just crazy, man. It's disheartening to know that this stuff exists out there, that people are being drawn in, that lives are being ruined. My friend who was drawn into a cult, he was drawn into a smaller cult. And it was in California, and it was very new agey type, they didn't have the whole alien story or origin story or anything like that, but it was more like energy and transcendence and the same kind of thing the Scientology preaches, just like not with the strict book and like regiment that you have to follow. But of course they're
more Los Angeles, sort of like more Los Angeles yoga studio kind of stuff.
exactly, precisely. And but ultimately some of the signals of the kind of manipulation that we were talking about in psychology was still present. And one thing that I noticed was he had been taught to believe that he owed these people who were running this cult, that he owed them, and that debt, it seemed like in his mind, that debt could never be repaid. And like that's something that had been drilled into him so that he would always have to do whatever they say, basically.
So maybe a smaller organization would tend to, when you come in, maybe love bomb you, and maybe you were at a place in your life where you maybe didn't feel particularly loved. A lot of times people who are coming out of a drug dependency are targeted by these groups. Or maybe people, especially like if it was like sort of a hippie cult or whatever, people who were sort of just kind of outside of the mainstream in one way or another. Maybe like Jim Jones, for example, targeted a lot of black folks to get into his organization, and by with anti-racist rhetoric, to be perfectly honest. And his organization was big, but not Scientology big. And so I think on the smaller ones, I think it's more like I owe these, like if you have a friend who like was just there for you at like the worst time, let you sleep on their couch and helped you find a job, and you'd be like, I owe this motherfucker my life. But like they're not exerting control over you. It's that sort of feeling, I think, maybe that's being manipulated there.
Yeah, but there comes that critical point, right? Which is like they're not exerting control over you until they are, right? And then they force you into that position where you will feel like you are obligated to do something, and then they keep forcing you into that position until it just becomes your routine. That's kind of seemed like what happened to him. And I was pushing up against that cognitive dissonance he was feeling. And, I was like his enemy almost, like talking to him and trying to tell him otherwise. And that's so scary.
Where the people, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I was just saying I was scared, when I faced that, because I was just like, what the hell? Like, what am I pushing up against? I could tell it wasn't him. It was almost like somebody was speaking through him,
Do was the organization like aware of your attempts to help your friend, and were they possibly telling him to get away from you, or you don't know?
I don't know, but I don't think so, because they didn't really need to do that. They didn't really need, he was isolated because of, I guess, the practices he was doing and the work that they had him doing. So I think that's how they really kind of isolated him from everyone. I was trying to get in touch with him all the time. Finally, I did, and we had this conversation. And really, they didn't have to do anything because his mindset was already like, yeah, no, like anything outside of this is not what I'm doing,
Right. Maybe it wasn't you specifically, but they may have been, people are going to tell you, there's going to be naysayers.
Oh, I'm sure they told him that stuff. Absolutely.
You have to tell somebody that stuff, even when you're a high control group is a high control group of two, and it's an abusive relationship, the abuser is going to tell you, oh, your friends are just crazy. Your friends are, I love you. Your friends don't love you like I love you. Why are you, your friends are just being nosy. It's the same. How is that any different than Scientology telling you not to talk to your cousin who is like, hey, that's a space alien cult? There's
Yeah,
like,
zero difference there. And, you know, for people who haven't experienced that, I have experienced being in a relationship like that with somebody who was like trying to tell me the same things, telling me like, oh, we need to move so far away from everybody, and, you need to, prioritize me over everything else in your life. And why would you go hang out with your friend when I'm here? Like stuff like that, like putting you in this position where you feel like you have to do whatever they say. And it can be quite powerful depending upon, like you said, like different factors of like what you're going through, how you feel about the person, right? And they leverage all of that in order to make it work.
and I think maybe we, in our relationships, we may all be guilty of some of these things some of the time. Like, I don't think there's any completely innocent people here, but I think when we are guilty of these things in our relationships, our partner might call us out, and we might be like, oh shit, maybe I, oh shit, okay, yeah, I maybe am doing that. You know what I'm saying? Because if your goal is not to control, and maybe you're just feeling a little jealous or a little isolated or whatever, and you go, oh, I really wish you'd, hang out with me instead of your friends. You go, hey, I've hung out with you 5 nights this week. Please don't do this. I'd like to go see my friends. I've I think I've been lucky enough to have never had that in a relationship. My last long-term relationship, he did ask me to move with him, but then when I said no, he said, yeah, I thought so. And so
Gotcha.
he wasn't trying to exert control over me, but I wouldn't have done so well in Sedona, Arizona. I don't think that's where he took a job. I'm like, it's 110 degrees there and everybody believes in chemtrails. I probably shouldn't live there.
That's not the place for you. Yeah, I guess this is a pretty good chance to talk a little bit more about the mental stuff because, well, I guess one thing that I've been thinking about is just, is there a certain type of person who is more susceptible to these manipulations? I know that certain populations are targeted, but I don't know. What do you think? I mean, you're the one who's kind of looked into it and studied it. What do you think about that?
I don't necessarily think it's a certain kind of person. I think it's a certain set of circumstances that someone might find themselves in. Because I think like, I think a lot of times our circumstances are what like dictates like our psyche. And there's a combination of things we can control and things we can't control that are going to create our circumstances. It's not like every time anything happens to you, it's just the world doing something to you. But sometimes the world just did something to you. Sometimes, like my friend's case, she lost her mom. Her mom was too young for her to have gone. I think, she was not yet 70. So she died fairly young, modern medicine being what it is. And it was fairly sudden. So, my friend was like, I met her at a rave and we were all doing like a lot of MDMA together. And we, oh, the world is love and all that stuff. But we all kind of said that crap when we were, it was like 5 a.m. and we were just waiting for the liquor store to open back up. And, but I think it was, less that, and in her case, more her circumstance. And also that her mother was in the cult. And so some of her mother's friends that she knew were in the cult and they were able to leverage that. So I think people who are experiencing trauma, people who are experiencing maybe alienation in their relationships, people who are maybe starting to have, maybe their kids moved out and they're starting to have a little of that empty nest thing where they're like, oh, I couldn't wait for my kids to move out, but now what are we going to do? Any of these sorts of feelings of loneliness that come with life's changing circumstances, I think are going to make people vulnerable. Same way it makes you vulnerable, Scientology or an abusive partner. And everything in every size control group in between.
What do you think that people can do to protect themselves against these kinds of infiltrations of their minds and lives?
That's the $1 million question here, right? I feel like, sociologists and psychologists who have been studying this, I've asked them these kinds of questions and they're like, you know, because it's anybody that ends up in these situations. It's not, it's not like your gullible friend or whatever. And in fact, a group like Scientology doesn't want your friend that you think is gullible, because then that person, then how useful are they going to be to the cult if they're a person that everybody thinks is gullible? So it's, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's, I guess, like, what's important is to maintain good relationships with people and trust the judgment of the people who care about you. But I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist or a psychiatrist. So, that's just my best guess as to what might help insulate you, or connections to a community already, maybe, where you're not, where if you're working at the food bank, and I'm not religious, but if you're already going to church, maybe you're going to be, and you have a good relationship with the people and at your church and the people who run your church, that might be an insulating factor. Like, family members will just tell it like it is, maybe.
So
But
basically, you need someone. You need someone in general. Like
right.
someone to you trust, someone who can be like, you know, this is happening to you. I was kind of seeking that. If I think back to my own personal story, I was seeking that when I was going through my abusive relationship situation, and unfortunately, a lot of the people I went to kind of like shrugged me off, and were just kind of like, oh, well, you're overblowing the situation. They didn't help at all. Like, they were just like, whatever. Until, like, there were some freak out moments, There were some moments where, like, the masks fell and, like, my friends happened to be there. And so they observed a little bit, and then they were like, oh, maybe I should, like, kind of reflect on what I told him. And eventually, I saw enough individually in order to be like, okay, yeah, like, do I want to go down this road? Absolutely not, And so, yeah, it definitely would have helped if I had someone who could just tell me like it is and be like, Will, like, this dude is like abusing you. You need to get out of here. You should not be moving in with him, like X, Y, and Z. And eventually, luckily, my inner voice was able to tell me. Um, but yeah, strengthening that inner voice is what I would say. Like your gut.
And another thing, that if maybe you're not the one who ends up in the cult, if you haven't heard from a friend of yours in a while, check in on your people. Maybe they're just busy at work and like whatever, but then maybe they have an abusive relationship with their job, and you could talk to them a little bit about that, because there's jobs that act like that too. I'm from Silicon Valley. I've seen some workplaces, where everybody's a little too friendly to each other. Everybody's a little too up in everybody else's business. It doesn't always rise to the level of a cult, but that's that FTX sure started to look like a cult. They all lived in this one house in Bermuda or whatever.
That's
That had
right.
some of those elements of it going on.
I didn't actually dig into the details of like, how the business was running or like the social fabric of the business, but I would not be surprised if you dug into it that you see a lot of the mechanisms we've been talking about in terms of how people are controlled. And even in my own experience, even currently, presently, in some business engagements that I'm involved in, I still see like different ways of manipulating the environment, like keeping certain people at a distance. Other people are like in the inner circle, right? And like, so this creating the group that has power versus the group that like doesn't have power that can be controlled.
Well, I mean, in a corporation, at least it's like bureaucratized, and people have like a position that is like your superior. In some of these control groups, they pretend it's flat, but it's not.
Interesting, interesting. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah,
Because
like you were saying, and I don't have a specific example, but you were saying that your friend got into like one of those sort of everything is energy sort of groups. And I bet that they were preaching that the organization was flat. But then when you took a look, you kind of knew who was in charge and who was that person's right hand and their left hand, or what have you, and who were their sort of deputies or whatever. If we're gonna use like a law enforcement, or even like a mob sort of
yeah, it
rubric
fits.
for what's going on. And the mob ain't that different than a cult either when you think about it. But I'd be willing to bet that a lot of these sort of, these, I guess, like kind of new age groups that end up going too far are preaching inside the group that this is a flat organization, and it's not. Whereas if you go work at IBM, you know who your boss is. You know who their boss is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, thanks for differentiating that. So, why don't you tell us a little bit more about like, your current endeavors or whatever you can talk about, like are you still researching cults like on your show? You still talk about cults, like you're still doing investigations. Is there anything that you've learned recently that's like new information, or are you just kind of like recycling things that you've learned before and just putting the word out there? Is there anything new?
Not brand new, but we've in the last maybe 2 years. So if I've been looking into Scientology since 2004, that's new for me. But for our organization, I guess 2 years isn't that brand new. And we only started doing a weekly live stream about Scientology and cults maybe 3 years ago. But one of the things I started to get interested in was the community of people who've left Scientology and how they've in some ways built their own hierarchies. And I find that rather interesting.
It is interesting, right? Like, and it gets you thinking, like, you know, was it inevitable? Because you grow up in this hierarchical structure. It's all you know, really. A lot of these people who are in it, from the time they were kids, are the ones who grow up and go to the executive level a lot of times. People who have been thoroughly, toyed with mentally. And they end up, coming to some kind of realization of what happened to them. They escape, and now they're trying to build their life on the outside. Well, how are you going to go to anything but your old habits? That hierarchical structure that you became comfortable with, that you were indoctrinated into, that you were engrossed with. So it makes perfect sense. Can you tell us a little bit more of like what you've seen in terms of on the anti-Scientology side? What stratifications have they started to make?
Well, I mean, so I want to draw a real quick distinction here. The anti-Scientology community contains people who have been in the cult and people who have not. The people who have been in the cult some of them end up growing out of it, I guess, for lack of a better term, but it ends up kind of cliquey. There's like popular people within it, and people are like kind of gatekeepy. People I've had people tell me not to publish things, not to say things, not to talk about certain things. But it's never the people that were never in the cult that come to me and be like, hey, you shouldn't be talking about that. It's people who were, because I'm talking about oftentimes the dynamics of the anti-Scientology community and how it, in some ways mirrors the organization that they left. And, in March 1st, I wrote an article about a very popular anti-Scientology YouTuber. I didn't post it myself in any of the anti-Scientology groups I was in, because I was like, I need these groups. I get information from these groups. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of leave this on my blog and post it elsewhere. Well, as luck might have it, that's one of the few articles I've ever written that actually caught fucking fire. And so everybody saw it. And all of a sudden, I just started finding that I was in less and less of these anti-Scientology Facebook groups where I was finding information. And I had been, for lack of a better term, maybe declared a suppressive person in a way, because I had criticized one of the more popular content creators doing anti-Scientology work. My criticisms weren't false. I didn't do a lot of character assessment in that article, as I'm often known to do on I call my blog The Defamation Times. But I did call for his removal from a charity. And, so I learned, I thought that would only happen if I was like trying to post my articles in there. And then I found out, nah, they saw it. They knew who I was, and I'm gone.
You think they were tracking you?
I think that I've never seen numbers like this on anything I've published before in my life. So
interesting.
If one of them saw it, they all saw it.
Wow. So were you ever able to communicate with anyone in the group about what was going on? Did you try talking to anyone?
With regards to a story I'm trying to chase down that I can't say shit about right now, I had some off the record discussions last night and this morning with some people in that community. but it was about the thing I'm trying to chase down. It wasn't about the article, because I didn't want to get into it with anybody about that, because I was trying to gather some information, and I figured, well, these people are willing to talk to me, even just on background, and the thing I'm trying to chase down is kind of convoluted and fucked up, so I need to do what I can. So, I mean, I know what happened. The same thing that happens when you criticize Scientology. I criticized their friend, and it was a popular person, and some of them went so far as to say that I'm working for Scientology.
I mean, I guess it would be hard for them to distinguish, like, I mean, I guess I empathize with them a little bit, because I'm kind of like, what else could they think, like, given their history, I mean, what else could they do? What else could they think? That's how I'm thinking about it, like, I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know if there is a more reasonable outcome than them being paranoid and suspicious about anyone who criticizes them and believing that they work for Scientology. It kind of makes sense. So
Yeah, I mean, luckily enough, the few people a couple of them I've met in person, and a few that I've interviewed over the years and had good relationships with over the years, one of them said, they're like, hey, some people are saying you work for Scientology. And I was like, well, I don't. And they're like, yeah, obviously. So, I mean, I had some good discussions and a little bit of reassurance from the people I do like. And I was able to find out that am still able to reach out to people if I need like clarification or whatever, which was really nice. But yeah, like sort of, and I don't know, are they the rank and file? Because these groups have thousands of people in them. And I know I've spoken to 10, maybe, not on this, but over the course, like had any real conversation either on or off the record with maybe 10. And it's mostly journalists, people who are writing or doing YouTube stuff about it. And yeah, I didn't expect it, but I wasn't surprised when it happened, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess my last question for you about this part is kind of, what's your goal in putting out these articles, doing these investigations? Are you still kind of fulfilling your own personal curiosity mostly, or do you see a bigger goal now that you've been doing this for some years?
I see, well, so the two things. One, the cult of Scientology is kind of on its way out. They're unable to recruit. So, there's pictures upon pictures of like empty Scientology centers. So I think the destruction of the organization, to the extent that it's possible to destroy an organization with billions of dollars, is most of the way done. So I'm certainly not there anymore. I'm like definitely interested in the aftershocks, or the wake that's happening there. And I'm interested in sort of parallels now in how this community operates. Like, for example, the chemtrails community that I've been covering for a while. It's not all going to be one-to-one. Some of the stuff on one side is more bonkers, and some of the stuff on the other side is more bonkers. But I'm just sort of interested in like the cultural and social dynamics of, to the extent that I have access to anyone still in the organization and those who have left the organization.
Got it. Cool. And
as far as Scientology goes, I'm still mad they stole my friend.
oh yeah, I mean, you never get over that, right? Hello, like, if
They can go fuck themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, yeah, they've stolen so many people from so many people, and it's baffling to me. But I guess the last thing, sorry, there is one more thing that I wanted to ask you now that you said that, which is, are there any resources for people who are trying to escape a cult or trying to build a life, after all their friends, like you said, their employer is probably part of it, like all these things, they're left with nothing, nobody and nothing. Is there any organization or a place that these people can go to try to start recovering and building a life?
I guess, like, if you can afford it, get yourself into some therapy, because you're going to learn a lot more about yourself that way. And people who are in high control, high demand groups are often resistant to this, because not just Scientology, but other groups will tell people that these mental health professionals are going to try to stop you from seeing the truth in one way or another. And it's not just high control groups. Conspiracy communities will do that too. They don't want you to go see a psychologist, right? Because the psychologist might start helping you change your thinking.
Yeah, it might start making some sense.
or make you think a little more critically about the things that you believe and why you believe them. But the thing is, when you leave these groups, a lot of times you're just in financial shambles. And so unfortunately, the best thing I think somebody can do is just not get grifted again. Reconnect with family if possible, unless your family's part of the problem, which is often not in a lot of other cults, but in Scientology it is. But like your friend, for example, I bet a lot of his family wasn't in that
Right.
organization.
No.
So when your friend got out, they could have gone to family. Go to family. Maybe try to rekindle relationships with old friends. Get involved in your community, even if it's hard, because these are the things that are going to like prevent you from falling down a different rabbit hole. Because you know, there's an organization that helps people to get out of Scientology called the Aftermath Foundation, but they're like an organization out of an office in Clearwater, Florida. And if you're in Seattle, Washington, they're not going to, it's going to be hard. And if you, be wary. I've learned, be wary of groups where these people are all former cult members. Even if they weren't all from the same cult, you might end up in a lot of the same dynamics. It's like one of the criticisms that people have of maybe a group like Narcotics Anonymous is you get addicted to Narcotics Anonymous drama instead of methamphetamine or whatever, because the people in there start forming these kind of codependent, dysfunctional relationships with other members of Narcotics Anonymous. It's no fault of the organization. How are they going to stop it? They don't even have, they're volunteer organization and they are trying to help people, but I don't know. Consuming a bunch of anti-cult content on YouTube isn't going to help really, right? Because all they're doing is bashing the organization you were in, but you already figured out that shit was bullshit. This is the hard part, man. This is the hard work. And I just wonder if the mental health community maybe needs to really start thinking about this and really start having sort of tracks for people in academia or whatever, where your track is this stuff.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think everything you said does. And I think we need to create a lot more tracks in general for people who are in situations where they experience trauma or manipulation, because that's happening a lot in a lot of different contexts, like you said earlier. And there's a lot of people who never get a chance to recover, right? It's just on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. So it's very hard to get out of the cycles because you're always constantly being pulled one way or the other. And
it's that dopamine hit, right? When you like when you leave any organization, just be careful of anybody who's too happy to see you after you leave that old organization. I know it's fucked up because it feels good to have people happy to see you, but maybe one of the things you liked about that old organization was everybody's a little too happy to see you around there too.
Yeah, it just sucks that becomes your life, right? Where, I mean, think about the paranoia, right? Like we talked about it earlier. Like, of course, you're going to look at everything slant-eyed and just be like, I don't know. Like, how can you even discern truth ever again after, you've been taught that the truth is whatever someone else tells you? So these are the questions.
Yeah, I wish I knew more, and I kind of, I wish I would have known that this would have ended up being my ultimate career path, because I would have taken maybe a different path at a university, and maybe I'd have a little better background and have better answers. But then again, a degree from the 90s about this, where people weren't even thinking about this, I'm not sure that would have, but hopefully, I would have continued with ongoing education afterwards in some way, shape, or form.
Education is a lifelong endeavor, as I always say as a teacher. And so you're doing good work and you're educating me right now. So I appreciate it, and our audience. So they appreciate it as well.
Well, I hope so. And I hope also if if I'm saying things people don't quite grok or, maybe even disagree with, I don't have all the answers here either, because this kind of field of endeavor, looking into cults and control groups, is fairly new. People like to make fun of cults and control groups, but not a lot of people like to think deeply about what's going on and how it happens.
I mean, I feel the exact same about race and racism. How you can replace that with race and racism is still true, even though people act like it's everywhere. But like, is it everywhere being talked about critically and with intention? Not really, no. And so that's why I created the show in the first place. Which reminds me, so let's get to it in these last few minutes that we have here. So, we talked about the fact offline a little bit about how a lot of these cults are almost exclusively white. And I just I've brought it up through the years to people that I notice that, but it's always just people like are like, oh yeah, I guess that's kind of right. Like when I think about it, or when we look at the numbers, but then there's no further conversation. But I just find that, I mean, we talked about before that they're targeting people who are in certain circumstances. So I wonder if it's just a matter of finances. Like these are the people who have the money and that we can extract.
So, I'll talk for white people here, and I can maybe speak to why, and I can speak to maybe has just recently been
Oh,
like
oh, you
attempts to.
hang on. You're breaking up pretty bad right now, and I'm not sure why.
Oh,
Oh, you're back. You're back. You're back.
all right, cool. So I think you had mentioned like money. Yeah, socioeconomics. If Scientology is looking for upper middle class and higher people, white people are just overrepresented. Um, that's just the case there. And their founder was very racist. Big fan of Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa, and so that stuff looms large in there, I think, because like if it keeps turning over generation after generation, and it's people of third and fourth generation are there from when Elron was there, and everybody knew that guy like really didn't like no black people or no Latin people, or wasn't a fan of the Asian folks. Well, that has some inertia, and when they're trying to recruit new people, yeah, I think their main way of recruiting is drug addiction, and they want people with money who are going into rehab to go into their Narcanon, and again, that's going to be overrepresented white people. Their recent attempt to reach out to the black community was the Nation. They tried to go with the Nation,
Partnering with the Nation of Islam. Eh?
right? And I'm just like, well, I'm like that. You could have maybe that's the only black organization that would have them. But I'm just like, you're not. That's not a group that's representative of the black community in a lot of ways. Like
That's like when these corporations try to like do some kind of Juneteenth thing, or when they try to do some kind of Black History Month thing and it just falls flat. That sounds exactly like that kind of action. Let's partner with the Nation of Islam to bring the black people in. That's funny.
right. But then that's also anecdotally, I've heard that there's a lot of people in there who believe in a new world order type of conspiracy theory, which they're probably, a lot of people in there believe in that, I bet there's not a lot of Jewish folks in Scientology, because that is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And so I think it just appeals to like a lot of upper middle class, like lapsed Christian white people. And when they have this 24-hour channel, and they have this show called Voices for Humanity, and we call it the White Savior Show, because it just shows them going into like they'll go into like, and it's all like fucking stock footage from the hood in the 90s that they'll be showing. So it's like you're turning off, if you're trying to reach out to basically anybody who has any knowledge of pop culture or our society, you're going to turn them off with this Voices for Humanity, or they'll be like, oh, we handed out our booklets in Africa. And it's like, you did what? Why are you handing out your booklets in Africa? What the fuck are you doing? And so I think that they're just unable to connect with the people who weren't going to be, they're unable to connect with demographics who aren't already in the cult, I think. And every time they try, it's either, like you were saying, kind of cringe, or just kind of insulting, actually, to be perfectly honest.
All right, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And everything that I've read or researched falls in line with that. Like a lot of the cults that are largely successful over a number of years seem to be legacy cults, right? Like,
right,
they bring in the legacy of the people who they had in. So, wow. Well, this has been incredibly interesting conversation. Gave me a lot to think about. I'm definitely going to be trying to find some more answers to some of these questions, and maybe I'll even talk to some people who were in some cults and escaped.
Yeah, just you know, just be extra kind to those people because
100%, man. I'm always kind, and like I
wasn't
mean,
me telling you to be kind.
like I talk to people about race and racism, right? Let me tell you, man, and I'm sure that you know this, but people are very sensitive about this subject matter, right? So I've got to be kind when I talk to people on this show about these topics, because I mean, the slightest hint of putting blame on someone, or suggesting some kind of responsibility, or suggesting some kind of reflection even, can trigger someone and make them, go into a fury. So
Well, I did see one where you did suggest to somebody that they do some self-reflection, and they were polite, but they were not open to it and some of the things they were saying on your show, I was like, motherfucker needs to self-reflect a little bit. Jesus Christ.
yeah, man.
But yeah, you had praised me for what I'm doing, and I'm just going to return that to you. You are doing, difficult work. You're talking a lot of times to people who are unaware, even maybe of their own like implicit bias. And sometimes those people, they'll just pop off and say some shit on the show that I would just be, I can't imagine just sitting there like calmly with some of the things. It's not like people are like, dropping slurs when they talk to you, but people have said some pretty racist fucking things to you about black people on your show. And I don't know, man. I don't know. You
I
got
mean,
the patience of 20 men.
yeah, it's just experience, all the teaching. I mean, kids have thrown trash cans at me, desk and chairs and stuff, and called me every name in the book, all kinds of stuff, and I had to like learn how to exist in that environment and teach people and get people to trust me and get people to and communicate with people and get them on the right path, right? And I think just doing that over and over with so many different people from all over the world, just it helped me build a tolerance, and a patience, and also it helped me self-reflect and realize that like my intention when I do these things, like when I have this conversation or when I have this live stream or when I teach a class, I'm trying to connect and communicate and share and transfer ideas and knowledge. That's like my mindset. And once I became sure of that, like it makes it easier to stay calm when someone says something racist to me, because I'm like, I'm not here to fight with this person, like before I would just, maybe my emotion might take over, right? And I might just like lash out. But like now, what happens instead of that, even if I feel that, I'll go directly towards my intention. And what is my intention? It's like a natural reprogramming or something. And so,
No,
yeah.
I've seen you start sentences with like, do you see how, or could it be possible that? And it's like, man, I'd have been like, some of the things I'd have been like, do you see how you could catch me outside?
Listen, I mean, sometimes I want to say it, but like, what's the point, Like, and again,
Yeah,
it just goes back to
they're
intention.
just going to dig in. It's the backfire effect. No matter, like, it's sometimes with certain people, especially if they like really, really believe something, if they really, really believe it, like the best you can do is try to plant the seed that maybe they should think about it a little bit more later, when they're not live or whatever. And what I appreciate too is that you also offer people, you're like, hey, if you'd like to have these kind of discussions not live on the air, I'd be happy to get in a Zoom call with you. And that's some shit I don't have time for.
I don't have time for it either, bro. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I appreciate the kudos. Keep doing your good work too. Tell everyone where they can watch your live stream and where they can follow you.
Yeah, the live stream is usually Wednesday through Sunday, though Father's Day was yesterday. So this week it's Monday plus Wednesday through Sunday, and that's twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. You can also just go to our website, echoplexmedia.com. Our blog, The Defamation Times, is there. I don't actually engage in defamation of character on my blog. And our podcast, you can just search Echoplex Media on any podcatcher. And if you want to find me on Twitter, I think the contact page of our website has all that information, because my Twitter handle is different than it should be. Oh, and I'm also Plex-Dave on Blue Sky, if anybody's interested there.
Nice.
And
follow him, guys. Follow his work. I am a subscriber to the Twitch channel because for the last 4 months, because I appreciate the work he's doing. He's really spreading some knowledge, and he does it in a fun and entertaining way. Check him out, guys. See what's going on out there. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate your candidness and your openness and willingness to have this conversation with me. And I'll see you next time, brother.
Yep, I'll see you. Maybe I'll see you in the chat, yours or mine.
I will see you in yeah, yours for sure. Probably first.
Oh, I'll see you. I'll see you in yours when I see you live too.
All right. So take care, brother. Thank you. Take care. Be well.
Yep.
All right, y'all. Well, that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for tuning into my conversation with Dave. Make sure you follow him on echoplexmedia.com, guys. Go check out the website. Subscribe to the Twitch. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you so much for the follow and for the subscription. Jeff Thomas Black, really appreciate you. Totally open to any of you guys showing up on the channel if you'd like to discuss race or racism with me. Just go to my website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com. Fill out the application, guys. I'll get right back to you. And yeah, come on, guys. I would love to talk to you guys anytime, okay? And join us for our events. If you want to know about all the different events that we're going, you can follow me on Meetup. I have a meetup.com/ it's called Racism Discussion Group. Meetup.com/racism discussion group. So y'all be well, take care, and I'll see you next time on the Contraband Wagon, where we're changing the conversation on race. Be well, everyone.